Is the age of woke coming to an end? Before we answer if the age of woke is coming to an end, firstly we must define what woke actually is. Now, it is a nuanced topic and, at its crux, refers to a violent psychosocial reaction against Western civilization, rather than simply a progressive revulsion of heteronormative society. The term, from its coinage in the early 2010s with the hashtag #StayWoke, has gone beyond the progressive nuances of awareness of social justice issues and questioning the dominant paradigm, and has come to encompass a spirit of sedition and revolutionary subversion, intersecting society amongst a myriad of abstract lines and ascribing an oppression ideology to this model, where one side of the line oppresses the other, so on and so forth. It is the message that seeks to engender a year zero, where society is undone and we begin from the blank slate of social justice and microaggression sinlessness, renewed through the cleansing flame of anarchic self-destruction, through incessant pollution of the discourse with the division-inducing casuistry and sophist rhetoric, the radical defilement of all institutions via the message, and a revolutionary sabotage of every conceivable traditional norm. I define wokeism thusly: a collectivist and conversionist ideology, hyper-aware and hyper-focused on the current diet of progressive and complex social issues in modern Western discourse, and pathologically desiring to be considered correct in one's dogmatic view of these rather complex issues, and pathologically desiring everyone to know how correct one is, through socially enforced compelling of thought by fear-based bully boy tactics, universal conformity by circular reason and moral grandstanding, and groupthink by the application of cultural deconstructionism by means of purely specious argumentation, casuistry, or sophistry. These latter mechanisms that seek the constraining of behaviour and assimilation of the non-woke are primarily justified by the convenient premise of assumed moral superiority. So is the age of woke coming to an end? Well, it would seem that we are beginning to see the disintegration of the repute of woke within the popular zeitgeist, with more and more individuals starting to see through the cultist claptrap of postmodern identity politics, and, in response, this enrages the woke even more so because all shadows detest rejection. In light of this, as we have seen with the post-election state of the woke-minded, they have become even more enamoured with the tactics of virulency, violence, and low-impulse acts of reckless abandon. For example, see the shaving of the heads of the witches, who now tout they are part of the 4B movement, and will wear poison rings to carry their deadly poison of aqua tofana, to neutralise their political opponents, who will not live their quote-quote authentic selves, just as the shadow of woke has chosen to. Authenticity in this sense is the hatred and active reprisal of all that is normal, to hence hyper-normalise the traditionally aberrant. Of course, the irony of their movement is that, as we are increasingly bearing witness to, in their impossible holy war to tear down, like a shadow would, the identified oppressive systems of their authentic selves, they have inadvertently created new and even more grotesque systems of oppression and inequality. This does not even begin to mention that to tear down these ostensible systems of oppression, built by the heteronormative according to their ideology, they will have to cultivate an insatiable desire for power and dominance which, given that they are shadows of the collective unconscious, is leading to destructive and self-destructive behaviours that are threatening to go nuclear. The shadow that is woke is the buried psychic rejections of the collective psyche of the West, which is being antagonised by malicious media propaganda and NGO meddling. As already mentioned in the case of aqua tofana, where left-wing extremist females are seeking to create a secret witches' coven or sorority, where they wear blue bracelets, the colour of alchemical water, or the notion of both the alchemical feminine and the Jungian unconscious psyche, again where the shadows we see of woke have festered and emerged from. and use poison rings containing the arsenic-based toxin to quickly administer lethal doses of poison to their ideological opponents. Some of them, shockingly, have even taken to social media to express that they intend on seeking employment in bars and cafes, like Starbucks, specifically to carry out this grisly form of political extremism against innocent people. Unfortunately, these people are innocent, but the shadows that have manifested themselves as the egregore known as woke delusionally see these innocents as evil incarnate because they disagree with the woke position. This has turned into, fundamentally, a cult that seeks to tear down society itself. However, along with this insanity and the 4B movement of shaved heads and sexual abstinence, this current media-driven mass psychosis claimed its first victim in Seattle. On election day, the political extremist Cory Burke hacked to death her Trump-supporting father, Timothy Burke, with an ice axe due to her being incensed by the loss of Kamala Harris and her father refusing, as Cory Burke relayed, to turn off the lights on election day. After her father refused her request to turn off the lights, Cory Burke went to her room in the $800,000 Seattle house, retrieved an ice climbing axe, tripped her father, who she was the carer for, animalistically bit and tore at him, and then struck him repeatedly with both the blunt and sharp sides of the axe. The wounds of Timothy Burke were unfortunately fatal, and Cory sat next to her father and coldly watched him struggle for life and sadly pass on. She then, still within her atavistic and bestial rage, smashed all of the windows in the house, which she would later describe as an act of liberation, officers had reported. When she emerged from the house on instructions of the police, she was reportedly clapping and smiling insidiously with her father's blood smeared across her face. A self-styled power lesbian, Cory Burke is married to a leading male-to-female transgender writer, Samantha Allen, editor for Them magazine, a Condé Nast transgender news publication, and the author of the acclaimed book, quote, Real Queer America LGBT Stories from Red States, unquote. It was reported that Burke had no recollection of smashing the windows or smearing the blood over her face, but that she was, quote, clapping because she was happy, unquote. Burke told cops that the killing was meant to, quote, help people change their attachment to their parents, unquote, and, quote, had to happen today, unquote. In other words, it is a further violent highlighting of this separation that has occurred between generations through propaganda and the contrivance of artificial social messaging tearing at the fabric of reality until all that is left is a solitary thread. Interestingly, Burke was also working for Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, the aerospace company, as a training program manager in the sector of launch operations and maintenance training. She studied at the City College of New York from 2009 to 2014, and a Bachelor of the Arts, specifically English Literature and History. Glossing over the degree that should firstly clue one into the fact that she was, most likely, heavily indoctrinated by radical Marxist and postmodernist professors, and, secondly, her aerospace training manager position has nothing to do with her useless degree. Therefore, we can put her professional position down to some form of nepotism or DEI or both. However, we can see the cult indoctrination centres that these meccas of Marxism have become, these universities and colleges, and truly this is the result of the long march through the institutions by radicals. Of note too, we see that in May 2024, Community College New York moved exclusively to online learning due to pro-Palestine protests, where we saw protesters trying to take over an administrative building at CCNY or Community College New York and set up a type of autonomous zone there temporarily. NYPD were then forced to arrest at least 25 protesters, and in response to the widespread nature of this unruly behaviour, Community College New York President Vince Boudreau announced that all campus operations would be online until further notice. Now, I am not against an end to the hostilities, wanton slaughter, and ongoing humanitarian crisis in that area of the world, but the woke radicals on college campuses and universities simply gravitate towards this banner as a way to further deconstruct and destabilise society through using it as an excuse to claim power, or in this case to actually take territorial control of an administrative building. By that token, they are using a humanitarian crisis in a far-flung region of the world to act as a pretext for the acquisition of power domestically, to usurp the power that their supposed oppressors possess and they consequently crave. In the case of Corey Burke, she sought to, in a fit of unhinged insanity, and so utterly assimilated by the propaganda, destroy the only authority figure in her life, her 67-year-old impaired and disabled father. This notion of being your authentic self and acts of liberation seem to be a pure perversion of Jungian or spiritual concepts. Rather than integrating the shadow in a healthy way, they seem to be embracing its destructive potential. Moreover, the animus, the masculine archetype contained within the feminine psyche of the unconscious, that which must be integrated lest it become a shadow or rejection, then an egregore of destruction, as we see in the case of Corey Burke. This shadow can be a powerful force for creativity, innovation, and spiritual growth. However, when it becomes distorted and unbalanced, it can lead to negative behaviours such as aggression, domination, violence, and control. On the latter points, that is exactly what we see with the woke and extreme feminist movements, and this shadow archetype represents precisely the panoply of negative attitudes and perfidious behaviours that we see exhibited from this subsection of the left-wing population. In the particular case of the 4B movement, the animus may be manifesting as a desire for power and control over others, particularly young people. The movement's emphasis on self-harm and the suppression of individuality could be seen as a distorted expression of the animus's desire to shape and mould others according to the ideology's own ideals. Like an inverted maternal aspect, it finds danger in the natural and healthy, thus it will go to psychotic lengths to protect its quote-unquote children, the country in this case, from those healthy and natural actions that it sees as utterly dangerous. Finally, when individuals resist the movement's ideology, it may trigger a defensive response from the animus, the unconscious masculine archetype that dwells in the feminine psyche. This could manifest as anger, resentment, and, of course, even violence. The movement's members may perceive resistance to the ideology as a threat to their identity and worldview, leading them to lash out at those who challenge their beliefs. Again, this is the reason for societal disruption, infanticide being relabelled as reproductive rights, the uglification of everything that is sacredly beautiful, the profaning against basic moral codes and ethics, the utter narcissism and the inversion of every gender norm, the escalation of violence and the chipping away of the edifice of society by the chisel of critical theory, the promotion of self-harm as identity affirming, the championing of stupidity and the glorification of the hoe and the harlot, and the normalisation of antinatalism. All of this is designed to erode and eventually totally collapse Western civilization because, as we have mentioned, this has been falsely identified as the oppressor of the contemporary shadow archetype that has been projected in the form of the egregore of woke ideology. This disguised empowerment of the individual through self-love is deceptive, for it is, in all actuality, the cult hamstringing this and psychologically breaking down the ethical and spiritual barriers of the prospective cult member. They will sell you the world, and in return you will sell them your soul, or so it goes with these powers and principalities that use the mask of a cult to subjugate the mind of the victim. That is, people may act to embrace their imperfections, to thus integrate their shadows through this affirming care to become their authentic self. But ultimately this is the materialistic inversion of something that is purely psychospiritual. In many ways, it is akin to giving a petulant child a loaded firearm and expecting responsibility to win the day. Delving deeper into this topic, the desire for attention and validation is a fundamental human need, one that the cult is more than happy to provide at a psychospiritual cost to the agency of the prospective cult member. And cults, whether sought or unsought, contrived or real, will exploit the marginalised feelings of the mass, of individuals broken in the atomised and hyper-individual dystopia of these mechanised and postmodern societies. Such a place becomes arguably a barrel full of ducks, and the predation of the cult need only a whiff of blood in that water, the efflorescence of both fear and hope, loathing and confusion, to begin in earnest its feeding frenzy on the helpless victims stuck within the claustrophobic confines of these desperately hopeless urban hellscapes. In short, our social environment, by its very profit-driven, anti-human, inhumanly demeaning, and massified structures, produce these kinds of bizarre and totally unsustainable psychological trends. We have, like the fool of the tarot deck, fallen across the precipice, beyond the end of history, and we are descending into realms unknown to our forebears. We have no psychological frame of reference for the area and headspace we are in now, and it genuinely feels as though we are in the midst of the final quarter of Calhoun's mouse utopia experiment. Inexplicable, perplexing, baffling to both reason and the senses is how we may describe it. But how could one have predicted anything less spectacularly awful, given the rise of the dependence upon the internet throughout the unsuspecting populace? Atomised individuals scurrying about like ravenous synthetics that insatiably crave immeasurable and abstract social clout from the now digitised public square of social media, or even to clamour for immorally absurd and dubious courses that come attached with the promise of get rich quick, or to pay ludicrously insane amounts of cash through donations to influencers or OnlyFans harlots that parasocially exploit their need for affection, human contact and social interaction. No matter how superficial or empty it may be, we live in an uncanny valley of a society where it appears like normality and has the outward appearance of normalcy. But in the last 20 or 30 years, we can retrospectively admit that there was an imperceptibly gradual shift that took place with the advent of digitisation and our level of engrossment into our black scry and mirror devices and screens. It seems to have altered our psychological state, but not our instincts, and thus we now dwell within this limbo, this twilight zone, where history has ended but the cultural tape has not caught up with that truth yet. It has the eeriness of Silent Hill. What we see now is a transitionary state societally, where we are playing catch-up psychologically with the new way of the world and the seismic changes that have occurred. Woke is the byproduct of Western culture being absorbed into that void-filled. Woke is the byproduct of Western culture being absorbed into that void-filled black mirror of the digital, and as we can bear witness to, woke goes far beyond the mere veneer of its dictionary definition. The nuances are profound within this novel aesthetic of the unsettling, and the truths of the human condition born by this era lie beyond liminal expression. This horrific behaviour is the psychological response to a broken culture, and the disturbing social trends that are falsely touted as progress. They, the cult of woke, and their priesthood of radical postmodern academia, financially supercharged by their lascivious affair with corporate capital, desire total and unwavering control over the minds of the masses. That every scintilla of disagreement needs to be routed out, and the infection of dissenting voices needs to be disinfected. It comes naturally to the mind of the zealous ideologue, or any zealot for that matter, that they do not see you as a person but as a political obstacle, a heretic to the cause, and thus your lack of conformity is of the utmost evil in their eyes. They cannot be bargained with, reasoned with, or debated, for they falsely yet self-righteously believe that by doing evil, they will eventually produce good. Such a weaponized mindset is built on the sand of emotion, and is like a wrecking ball to reason, culture, and human dignity, as is self-evident in today's world. Most ideologies are ultimately sterile or barren. This is either through celibacy, pious antinatalism, see the monastic asceticism of monks and nuns worldwide, or by self-castration, see the Attis and Magna Mater cult from Rome, for example. They also, interestingly, dressed in the opposite sex's clothes, men dressed as women. This, in a perverse psychological way, ensures that one is married to and invested emotionally in the cult above all else, that their biological drives are regulated and tailored to ensuring the prosperity and continuation of the antinatalist force of the cult. Hence, since we all have a biological drive to reproduce generationally, then such a drive in the ideologue is transferred to cultural reproduction rather than biological reproduction. By that, I mean that the need in the ideologue is to indoctrinate the youth of those who still reproduce, but may be out with the confines of the ideology, or be only a lukewarm adherent, to thus turn these youths into the fanatic vanguard of the next generation. In short, these ideologies pilfer the offspring of others and adopt them into the ideological framework. As you can imagine, this absolutely decimates the birth rates after a few generations and destroys the cultural fabric of any civilization that succumbs to such an internal attack by a fanatic ideology. That is why they require every facet of media and culture to reflect the ideology, to artificially maintain its relevancy, and to advertise or extol the virtues of the ideology to the youth. This was true in the Attic cult of Rome and the youth brigades of the right and left-wing socialist ideologies of the 20th century. Truly, there is nothing new under the sun. A nation can survive its fools, and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he is known, and carries his banner openly. But the traitor moves amongst those within the gates freely, his sly whispers rustling through all the alleys, heard in the very halls of government itself. Both sides are insane indeed. The dialectic is such that both sides fundamentally reflect each other in an inverted manner, though they are altogether unaware of this due to their dehumanizing view of the other polarity. As it is said, the light will always cast a shadow, and pride will always cast away its rejected aspects that will inexorably lead to its fall. I have covered this topic in many videos, but most recently within my video titled, quote, "The Gnostic Explanation of Woke." I hold up a mirror to society. That is what I primarily do. And if individuals dislike that reflection, then it is best that they seek to remedy it for the better. To remain in the dark about the state of society is why the consequences of our collective apathy have now caught up with us. The shadows remain unintegrated, and the rejected aspects gain potency by the day. To face the demons of our past and present is what will bridge the cosmic divides for a better future for all. I am not insane because I seek to hold that mirror up, nor are those on either side of the dialectic any less human because they have been made hopelessly dependent victims of brainwashing. Propaganda will always lead one to dehumanize another. It is how power perpetuates through learned ignorance, and it is only through reason, acknowledgement of the uncomfortable truths, and empathy that society can be soundly healed from this darkness of programmed ignorance. So is the age of woke coming to an end? Yes. I feel there is a gradual deflation of its potency, that we have brought into the disinfectant of the light that which was plotting our destruction in the concealment of darkness. Woke games and woke consultancy firms are failing to have any impact, and are being rejected en masse, a snowball of resistance that has now amassed into an avalanche of collapse for wokeism. However, with the end of woke comes the grey no man's land of what comes next. From there we will need to refashion society, to heal from the harm of our past and uncomfortable present, and build a future that is far more stable and accommodating to both the human being and the family unit.